everybody. Today is Monday, October 6th, 2025, and our friends Graham Fuller and Ray McGovern are back with us. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nima. Pleasure.
I think for many of us who are concerned about the situation in Ukraine and what has happened at the Valdai conference, in which our friend Gilbert Doctorow was reporting that the elites are not happy with the way that Putin was warning the West, and he was not that much mm, how influential, that much solid in his sort of message toward the West. How, Graham? Let me start with you. Do you think that he he need to be more aggressive toward the West, in your opinion? Is that going to be helpful for his position? I'm talking about the Putin's position in the war in Ukraine.
Right. Well, the whole remarks made by Professor Doctorow, I have great respect for him. By the way, that doesn't mean that I or we always agree with him, but he's a remarkable and insightful and knowledgeable commentator. But I was stunned to hear him essentially more than once, maybe three times, support the position that maybe it was really time for Vladimir Putin to step down because he has failed to meet Russia's strategic needs in the way he's conducting the war by being far too cautious and giving in to Western pressures. And he suggested that there are quite a number of people within the Kremlin, and it's interesting that we can talk about these things in Russia today. This is not Stalin's Russia. But anyway, yeah, he's. I was also puzzled by what he was doing. We can argue about whether he's right or not right, but for it seems almost like Gilbert is, who, as I say, I have great respect for, is almost aligning himself with certain groups within the Kremlin on the conduct of Russian foreign policy. And that surprises me. And it has all kinds of other implications. People who say, this proves that Russia's losing the war, or others who say, look, we've all along said Putin is very cautious. Every single various political position can be justified by this argument, including the fact that we should double down ourselves because Putin is losing now. It's a very pregnant position, if you will, to be taking in this debate.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ray. Your take.
Yeah, I've known Gil for many years, and I share what Graham just said about my respect for his acumen. On this particular one, I don't agree. I think Gil is taking what he's seeing on these TV shows, which are becoming more hard line. At least last week they were, and kind of thinking, well, maybe there is something to what other people have speculated, that Putin is going too slow, that the military can't abide by his appeasing Donald Trump, okay, and that therefore he might be overthrown. Well, there's not really a lot of evidence to that. When I looked at the Valdai thing and pretty much read the whole thing, uh, Putin exudes confidence. He's got a good sense of humor. He's clearly in charge, and there's very, very little in any of his remarks to suggest that he feels a little defensive or, sure, he says every now and then, we're not naive and we're not going to be taken advantage of. Well, yeah, all right, he's going to say that anyway. So my notion is that Putin really is on a roll. He's made very clear that he gives priority to developing a decent relationship with the United States, that Ukraine is a lesser issue, a subordinate issue. So are things like the US bombing the hell out of Iran the first time. Don't quote me on the second time, okay? So, he even said right up, or Piskov, I guess, said, look, that's on a different plane from our continuing attempt to improve relations with the United States. And, just to finish up on this, the Tomahawk missile issue is something that people are, I think, overdoing. When the judge asked me about this first time, I said, not going to happen. And I just vaguely remembered that most of the ones, at least the ones that were able to carry nuclear weapons, had already been destroyed under the INF Treaty. And then I didn't really know, but I didn't think there are very many Tomahawks left. They're sort of old, and they're for navies. And Ukraine doesn't have a navy. Ukraine doesn't have a navy, and for them to put it in some ground-based thing, or so I checked with some real experts who know a lot more than I do. Scott Ritter, for example, and he says, yeah, it would take years for them to do this, and they'd have. Well, the understanding, of course, is we wouldn't sell them to Ukraine. Oh, that's not the idea. Now you sell them to the Europeans, right? And the Europeans don't have enough money, but they'll buy them anyway. And but by the time they buy them, then they'll give the Ukrainians don't have many people to man them. And so when Putin is asked about this, and he said specifically, not the follow-up question, but part of the first question, well, how do you react to this? He's going to say, of course, well, I mean, the attackers didn't do much. They're not going to change the course of the war. But in answer to your question, if subjunctive case, if that were to happen, then the light at the end of the tunnel that we've been seeing with respect to improved relations with the U.S., or that would be really a casualty of this.
Yeah.
If okay, now Lavrov has said there's no final decision on that, and there isn't any final decision. I suspect that Putin and the others are back channeling this. They're in contact, and that our people, perhaps Witkoff or even Rubio, are saying, look, this is just a sop to the Europeans. They want some earnest of our intentions to defend Europe. So we'll throw out we'll talk about the Tomahawk, which is totally unrealistic in technical terms as well as political terms.
Okay, but Ray, don't you find it a bit surprising that of all times, while Europe at this point is in virtually a state of hysteria, there's hardly any better word I can choose to describe these governments that are reeling on the verge of collapse, some of them virtually collapsing, huge pro-Palestinian demonstrations that are threatening the regime. They don't have any money. And here they are suggesting maybe that they should spend more money on defense, Germany and all of it. That's the last thing that Europe needs. I'm amazed at this point that that Gilbert should be proposing this idea that maybe Putin is beginning to lose it, that he's becoming too soft. I would think this is just throwing, I don't know, what would you call it, oil on hot flames in Europe to be introducing this idea. It may be saying, look, we can win. Putin's about to fall. It's what we've been saying all along. I was just very, very startled. I don't want to make this too much just about Gilbert Doctorow, but it's quite remarkable that he is making these comments and associating himself as a non-Russian with this cause. I find striking.
Yeah.
Well, he sort of is he is a Russian.
No.
I mean, he's an American, but he's from a long line of Russian distinguished people.
Right.
I know Gil well enough to be quite sure that whatever alignment his views lend themselves to, that this is honest. I mean, that he's looking at these people and he's impatient himself, perhaps, and when he sees Putin acting less strongly than Gil Doctorow thinks, it's easy to get impatient. Craig Roberts is of the same persuasion. There's other people. So I have no doubt that he's honestly come to this conclusion.
Oh, yeah.
Whether they align themselves with other things or not. It is disturbing that Europe is such in such disarray, but you know that's part of the reason for this. It seems to me. I don't believe everything Lavrov says, or even what Putin said at Valdai, but they explain this stuff by saying, well, the Europeans are in such trouble; they need a diversion. I mean, not only tomahawks, but seizing tankers that they say have Russian oil in them. Come, give me a break. That's piracy. I mean, there's one guy trying to be Napoleon, for God's sake. He's not even as tall as Napoleon. He doesn't say that, but so he seems thoroughly relaxed. Now it could be. You always have to allow, as you said before, Graham, for 100 flowers to bloom, and contending views to contend. But you know, if well, if this plays out the way it's supposed to, and the Russians are winning, and then the big fly in the ointment will be people like Kellogg and others, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, apparently, that have been telling Trump just the opposite, that the Russians are losing. My God, sooner or later, it'll become apparent on the ground that they've been giving him a foul line, just as Bill Burns and his predecessors gave presidents a foul line because that's what they wanted to hear, that is, the president. So it could lead to all kinds of mischief. But as far as Putin is concerned, maybe he's too naive. Maybe he doesn't understand things that Gil does. I don't think there's much likelihood of that, but we have to allow for that possibility.
Yeah, but Europe just seems to be the most dangerous and like a mad dog at this point, and particularly MI6 with all of these false flag things and attacks in the Baltics and drones here, drones there, and most Europeans, most I guess world viewers tend to believe it because it's you have to do a lot of work to think about what false flags are all about. But it seems to me an extraordinary moment to be introducing this idea that Putin maybe is weak and losing his position. And in my view, anyway, whether it's right or wrong, it plays into the hands of those who have been chanting all along that Putin is about to lose the war and on the point of being fired or collapse.
I think the whole point, Ray and Graham, I think the whole point of Paul Carrick Roberts and Doctorow is that Russia should define some sort of conditions for the West that they, just make them avoiding any escalation in the conflict in Ukraine in order to avoid the escalation. The whole point is to deter just what would happen if something big happens in terms of pulse flag operation, attacks on Russia with Tomahawk missiles. Just imagine hitting one of the big cities in Russia and killing many people. That would hugely escalate the situation between Russia and the West. The whole point is this. Today I talked with Paul Carrick Roberts. He said he's concerned about the use of nuclear weapons as time goes by with the conflict going on and on. But after all, they're asking for some sort of red lines being defined by the Russian president. I don't see that's the attitude of the Russian president. Putin avoid defining any red lines so far. As I remember, if I'm not mistaken, so far the only time that I've heard him defining a red line was about the Taurus missiles from Germany going to Ukraine. Not more than that, anything else. Because when you put out your red lines, you don't control the situation.
That's
They can
right.
escalate the situation. You can have your red lines privately, and you say, if they pass those red, I'm going to react. But you're not going to put it out for those people who want to cross the red lines.
Exactly. No, I think you're absolutely right on that, Nima. So, but I mean, I think this has raised the level of danger to a new and much higher level than we've seen in weeks anyway. And I would come back to my remark that I think Europe is proving to be amazingly irresponsible and irrational, if not hysterical, in handling this. And maybe as Dr. O himself argues, if Russia does not move more decisively, then perhaps his enemies will feel that they can take even greater liberties and push further and provoke further.
Let me add an element here. I found Putin at Valdai almost obsequious vis-a-vis Trump. He's
Yeah.
such an easy guy to talk to. We had some terrific talks, and he's sincere and he wants to come to a resolution of these problems, and blah 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 blah. The way I explain that to myself, and who knows what the real explanation is that Trump is not okay. As my teenage kids used to say, he's not okay. In other words, there's something wrong up here, maybe his physical state as well. Now, if I'm Putin and I am briefed by my presidential daily briefer, and he says, look at Trump at the UN. He goes over an hour, and look, oh my God, it's a disgrace. And look at him in Quantico. He acted like an adolescent. He comes in there and he's used to. Well, the music stops. Oh my God! First time I've ever come into a place like this when there was no applause. So you can applaud if you think they want, or not applaud. And if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave the room. And there goes your rank, and there goes your future. My God, that's the reaction of an adolescent. Maybe I'm being mean to adolescents. It's puerile. So anyhow, that whole deal really smelled high heaven. Putin, is he gonna be more vociferous and tough? No, he's gonna the equivalent of appease Trump, try to get on his best side. And best of all, what just happened yesterday? Trump came around and said, "Good idea, not a bad idea, Mr. Putin. We think we ought to extend the New START treaty for a year, just as you
Yeah.
proposed 3 weeks ago." Man, that's big. Okay, so
That was
again,
big. That was big.
yeah. So again, the Russians are kind of playing the long game here, and the Europeans realize that NATO is finished. That
Yeah.
America is not gonna defend them. So it's just going to take a while for these people, Macron and Nautz and Stommer, to realize that this was a really stupid idea. If their populace has not removed them by then, they will be removed. At least they'll be in the dustbin of history
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
ain't got no weapons, they ain't got no money, they ain't got nothing vis-a-vis what the Russians have already done in Ukraine. It's amazing and it's pretty bizarre. And I agree, Graham. It's bizarre in spades what the Europeans don't seem to get just
Well,
yet, but
I
Trump
mean,
gets it.
Ray, don't you really see this, Ray, as a struggle for Trump's soul, if you will, between Europe and, on the one hand, Europe and the hardliners on the one hand, wherever the hardliners are, and the those who are looking for some kind of settlement. And Europe, of course, has weighed in very heavily and very negatively, continues to weigh in very negatively on the side of anything to do with peace. I was rather terrified when Trump went to London and got carted all around the royal gardens and the gilded coach and all of that. I thought at that point that maybe King Charles had actually bought Trump, but I don't know. I mean, this is what's going on. It's a struggle for who is going to get the ear, the last ear of Trump.
Well, if you look at uh, Alaska, the summit, uh, that was Putin pulling Trump's uh, chestnuts out of the fire.
Yes.
Trump had said 50 days if you don't wrap up the Ukraine thing and come to a negotiation at 50 days and an immediate ceasefire. No, not 55 days. And then it comes to be 2 days left. Oh my God. So he sends Witkoff, and they have the session, 3.5 hours, if memory serves, with Putin. And he says, all right, that's a good idea. Why don't we divert attention from all these, these bone-crushing sanctions and all the crap? Let's meet and we talk. And that worked out in a way that most people didn't expect because Trump came off that immediate ceasefire thing. The thing is, the next day or 2 days later, there they are, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, Snow White. Now, no offense to Snow White, saying she's Trump. Okay, Trump. But they were seven dwarfs. I mean, look at them, how they gathered around to hear the word from the master, how they were treated. Pardon me now, guys. Would you leave the room? I promised Vladimir that I talked to him for a little while now, and so would you just leave and come back later? I mean, they were treated like they treated very disdainfully. So I think Trump has made his decision. He sees that Putin means business. He thinks he can deal with them, and he sees that the Europeans, to quote Stalin, will when he asks the Vatican, hey, how many divisions does the Pope have? Well, how many divisions does NATO have without the United States? Very, very few. So those are the realities on the ground. Putin is incredibly cautious, and I just think we're really lucky. I'll go on record and say we're really lucky to have a guy like Putin and an accomplished diplomat like Lavrov. They're not going to be provoked.
Yeah,
They're going to play
absolutely.
the waiting game. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you can also put yet another more complicated conspiratorial spin on this by suggesting that Putin himself or the Kremlin itself is suggesting that Putin is under heavy pressure from the hardliners, play a much rougher game. And therefore, if the West doesn't wake up and face this reality, they're going to have to find somebody, they're going to have to face somebody who's really tough. That's one possible interpretation.
Yeah. In fairness to my friend Gil, he adduced that as the second possibility here. In other
Yeah.
words, yeah, these talk shows, man, have they gotten pretty rabid, and they're criticizing the president for not going fast enough. Oh my God! Well, it could be what Gil had decided the preferred thing was, but it also could be that this is just the kind of thing that's to show how tough the Russians can be, and that
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point you made, Graham.
And, Graham, how do you feel about Donald Trump himself? It seems to me you remember the day that Zelensky met with Donald Trump the first time. He said that you are playing a losing hand. You don't have, but the losing hand right now is the hand of Donald Trump. Playing a losing hand, but he can make a winning hand by strategic partnership with Russia. In my opinion, he can change the whole game. Russia is prepared to do that, but he's so hesitant to go in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. Nima, I think that's a very good point. And what we were just talking about with what Putin should do to be tougher, at the risk of not being very PVC, politically correct about how one nation leads to another, Ukraine has no voice fundamentally whatsoever in this game. Everything they own, their money, their weapons, except I will give them, they have a lot of fighting guts. They deserve that much credit. A thousand, tens of thousands have died. But basically, Ukraine is nothing if Trump decides that he is going to tell them, "I'm finished with it. The war is over. Sit down and do something about it." He can even tell the Europeans that, in my view, although that's a little harder sell. But what pushback do the Europeans have on all of this? We could easily argue that Trump has been very, very weak in pushing back against both Europe and especially Ukraine.
Yeah, I would say that he's got Kellogg, maybe Rubio. He's got these people to deal with.
Who
Now he
are
was
they,
sport.
Rick? Who
Well,
are
he was
those?
sport. Well, Witkoff, for example, not Witkoff, but what's it, Kellogg? Yeah, he said about 2 weeks ago about these, these tomahawks. Well, they're going to change. When they get, that's going to change everything. And everybody parroted that. Now, when Lavrov addressed that 2 days before Putin spoke at Valdai, he was asked about all this stuff. He said, "Oh, come on! For God's sake, this is all just trying to show the Europeans that the U.S. is still listening to them, right?" And Maria Zakharova said, it's really strange how Keith Kellogg says things that are inconsistent with the policy of the President of the United States. You know, in our system, people obey the policy, and it's really strange. When
Right.
Lavrov met with Rubio, that's the policy. We don't understand quite where Kellogg is coming from. So Zakharov is no small person there. So they deal with this, and they give leverage, or they take that into account and say, okay, so in my view and in theirs, I guess, they don't think that Trump is okay, number one, and that he's his own person, number two, and that accounts for his changes in mind. My God, what if he changes his mind tomorrow about being willing to negotiate an extension of New START? My God, how will they deal with that? I don't think that's going to happen, but who can exclude that kind of thing? So all I'm saying here is that the worst nightmare of Russian and Soviet leaders, as you know better than I, is to have somebody who's mercurial, who's unpredictable with the nuclear codes. Okay, and that's why I think Putin, who is already winning in Ukraine, is saying, "Look, don't rush things. For God's sake, flatter this guy. Say he's great to talk to. By and by, we may get what we want. That is an arrangement which takes our key interests into account here. Our strategic interests are, the ones that are existential for us. And, we just have to be patient. After all, we're winning. Why do we have to rush? That's my
Yeah, and
notion of him.
and Ray, on top of that, I absolutely agree with you. And on top of that, I mean, if we wait 2, 3, 4 months, how many of these seven dwarves and sitting in the seats of power in Europe are still going to be there? And that will be a big changer. I mean, we've already seen now in the Czech Republic a shift away from the rah-rah pro-NATO line. Hungary has been there. Fico in Slovakia has been there. The tide is shifting. So I can easily imagine not Trump, Putin thinking that I just have to wait for all these seven dwarfs to start collapsing and the chaos that will come across Europe. And God knows how Trump himself will change in the interim.
Mhm.
Ray, 4 days ago we had Keith Kellogg arguing on, if I'm not mistaken, on Fox News. He said that officials in Washington are telling him that Russia cannot win. Who are these officials? Do you think these people are related to Marco Rubio? Because it's the mindset of establishment, it seems to me.
Nima, I wish to hell I had an answer to that. Who are these officials, huh? Graham and I go back a ways. We tried to tell presidents exactly what we thought, and usually we were right, believe it or not. Now, these guys, do they really think that Russia is losing? Well, the head of national intelligence in December of 2022 said, the Russians already lost. They're losing weapons hither and yon. They can't even replace the weapons that they're leaving on the battlefield, and they have no indigenous capability to replace those weapons. That's December 2022. Avril Haines was the name of the national
Wow.
intelligence director. Now,
Wow.
6 months later, in July, Bill Burns. Bill Burns tells the president, haha, Putin has already lost. His army has been shown to be inept. You could say that in the big speech that you're going to make in Helsinki. And of course, Biden did. Now, I couldn't figure out, I tried to retrace Bill Burns' steps. Okay, where was he before he told the president? Oh, he was in Kiev. Who was he talking to? Zelensky. So, I mean, there's the horse's mouth. I mean, Zelensky says, "Oh, no worries here. We got it. We had the Russians kid army." So he tells the president that. My God, is that the way it goes down? So there's a whole history of this happening. I'm not sure Tulsi Gabbard has yet been able to replace those inept people or worse people that invented Russiagate and are in part responsible for the nadir of
Right.
our relationship.
Right.
But there are not many around. I mean, Graham and I would come back in a heartbeat on a consulting basis and say, "Oh, Alexis, for God's sake, you read what they say and you see how it changes, and you watch them on the ground, and then you force your conclusions. You don't listen to Zelensky, for God's sake. You don't listen to Netanyahu. You listen to us." That's the way it used to be. Ain't no more.
Yeah, well,
apparently.
but Ray, you also have been around the real politicians more than I have even, and you certainly have an awareness that if the United States were to officially concede or acknowledge, even slightly, that it had that NATO, not only the U.S. but NATO, had lost the war in Ukraine, there would be all hell to pay for what this means for the future of the West. And then you have all these people saying, well, today it's Ukraine, but if we lose Ukraine, tomorrow there goes Taiwan. So you've got this whole global picture of what it means for the U.S. to lose anything. I mean, to lose maybe in a battle in Venezuela, I don't know. But I mean, who will dare say that the United States, as the world's greatest superpower, is in a position capable of losing a war?
Well, that's where negotiations comes in. The way I see Putin, he's willing to give Trump as much lipstick to put on this pig of defeat as is necessary. There's going to be a lot of lipstick, but it can be worked out. Putin
Well,
is in it for the long game. He wants to have recognition of Soviet Russian interests here. He doesn't want Ukraine and NATO. So if you take that as a kind of a premise, he can play a waiting game. And let's see, I was going to say something else in response to what you said, Graham, but it escapes me now. Please, Nima, proceed.
Yeah, yeah. I want to shift the talk to what's going on in the Middle East, because right now we've learned that a lot of weapons, or the United States is moving a lot of weapons from the United States to Europe, then to the Middle East, to Qatar, and it seems that they're serious about something in the Middle East. I don't know how serious is that for Donald Trump himself, because he's so much, you cannot rely on what Donald Trump is talking about. Okay, every time it comes out, it's just something different from what he really wants to do. And here is what he said about the attack on Iran.
And we shot 30 Tomahawks, you know that. On top of, after the B-2, how about that? The B-2s, what they did, those beautiful flying wings, what they did, they hit every single target they hit. And just in case, we shot 30 Tomahawks out of a submarine. Every one of them hit too. So I would say Iran was not particularly thrilled. They were going to have a nuclear weapon within a month. And now they can start the operation all over again, but I hope they don't, because we'll have to take care of that too if they do. I let them know that you want to do that, it's fine, but we're going to take care of that, and we're not going to wait so long. It should have been done long before I came along. You know that I had the pilots of the B-2s in my office, the famous Oval Office. I had them in the B-2s. They came in to the White House, and we talked about it. They said, you know, sir, for 22 years, our predecessors and us trained for that hit. For 22 years, they were training to take out the nuclear potential of Iran. He said, but it was only when you came along that we did it. And they were so happy that they did it. But they've been training for that hit for 22 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've been training. They've been training because Netanyahu has been lying. He's been lying about how close Iran is to getting a nuclear weapon. Now, without rehearsing the whole thing, back in 2007, a national intelligence estimate. Now, Graham used to supervise those things. They used to be honest, and that one was the only one I can cite. And I know about most of the NIEs, the only one I can cite that prevented a war, a wide war, or at least it helped prevent it, because what Cheney and Bush wanted to do is Iran on their way out in 2008. Somebody appointed a an honest manager of intelligence. His name was Tom Finger from the State Department.
Yeah.
They concluded after a year, they had some luck too. They had some secret things that came in during that year. In November 2007, they concluded with high confidence, unanimously, all 16 agencies at the time, that Iran has stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and had not resumed work on that. That judgment was carried forward until March of this year, when Tulsi Gabbard said the same thing, adding that there's no indication that the supreme leader is going to change the fatwa. Now, I've learned from you, Nemo, how iron-bound a fatwa is. It's not like an encyclical or a nice, you have to sort of obey it if you're in Iran. So anyway, even though Trump and his B-2 pilots and stomach people say they've obliterated Iran, the idea was not to obliterate. They couldn't obliterate the nuclear potential. They're trying to decapitate and regime change in Iran, and that didn't happen. Now, as far as the deceit of Netanyahu, you probably remember this scene at the UN. I don't know if you could see that. Yeah. So this is a book that So this is a book that my friend Gareth Porter wrote back in 2013. He's an amazing, and he's a Gellhorn recipient. He's an amazing reporter, right? And he interviews everybody in the UN, people he could see in Iran, Israel, and else. And he came up with this thing. Said, look, it's a manufactured crisis. They never were very close to a nuclear weapon. And I'll let you speak to this, Graham. But my notion is that before 2007, when Tom Finger did that honest estimate, it was a matter of the NIE saying, well, we think, let's say 1998, we think that Iran could probably get a nuclear weapon in 5 years. And then 2001, oh, we think it's probably about 10 years, 5 years away. So it was all completely guesswork. Am I wrong in that, Graham, or were you not really in that position then?
Not at all. No, I was not involved in that exact thing at that point, but was present for a great many of the related discussions about how far Iran was in promoting its nuclear capabilities, especially weapons capabilities. At this point, however, though, I tend to be more concerned with looking at the psychology and the politics of what is behind all of this. And what particularly scares me above all else is Bibi Netanyahu, who I think is probably the only leader that I would without hesitation say might use a nuclear weapon against another country. There are a lot of other countries out there, but Bibi is more likely to do it than anybody else. He has this messianic view, and he's talking about the future of Greater Israel. Now, when Israel is under huge pressure, let's say within the United States, anti-Jewish lobby, anti-Zionist movements, anti-Zionist movements growing in Europe, there's a lot of pressure there. And I tend to think that Bibi views Iran as the ultimate long-term threat. I think correctly, perhaps. I mean, Iran is the biggest country in the Middle East, and so and a very ancient civilization. So I think he feels that if he does not take down this government, destroy it, decapitate it, whatever else it is, that his work will not be finished. And furthermore, whatever legal trouble he's in, that will completely wiped the slate clean as far as he is concerned. So yes, I'm deeply concerned whether Iran is on the threshold of a bomb or not a bomb. We do know that what Iran was able to do with its conventional missiles
Right.
were devastating to Israel. I don't know how Bibi is willing to face that, and I don't know how far Washington has committed itself to defending Israel against these conventional missiles.
Ray, what's going on with the policy toward Iran, in my opinion, is the same as we follow the case of Ukraine. They wanted to defend Ukraine, but they have destroyed Ukraine after all. And it seems that they're convincing Iranians to go after nuclear bomb. They're forcing them. They're doing everything at their disposal to force them to go after nuclear bombs, because this government, the new government, the new administration in Iran, they were confronting those people from the right, from the left. Those were arguing that there is no point of talking with the United States. They wanted to talk with the United States. They want a political solution for what's going on.
Yep.
But the Trump administration and the policy in the Middle East forcing them, is just weakening the government within Iran. And I don't understand the whole point. How many times do they need to fail with these sort of policies?
Well, with Netanyahu in control, we're all in pretty dangerous territory. I agree with Graham. If let's say in extremis, here's a guy Netanyahu who does well, force starvation, does genocide, has personal reasons to stay out of jail with his wife. And would he be loath? Would he hesitate very much to use a nuclear weapon if in extremis, as I say? I don't think I would argue that he would hesitate. So the question is really whether anyone is telling Trump the truth. Now, we used to do that, okay? Now, Bibi Netanyahu is lying through his teeth. You saw Trump say there, just in that clip, if I recall correctly, oh, we can't let Iran get a nuclear weapon. Well, Ted Postal says they could get enough refined stuff up to the necessary refinement to have a weapon, and they could maybe in an apartment house build a weapon. Now, the fly in the ointment seems to be something I don't quite understand, because a fatwa is a fatwa. And if I recall correctly, when I asked you last time, Nima, if the supreme leader wanted to reverse a fatwa against developing nuclear weapons as opposed to nuclear enrichment and all that other stuff, could he do that in secret? Have you changed your view on that? Because
No,
it seems
I
to
think
matter.
that will be public. It's because it's a matter of the grand decision on his part, and everybody should know about it.
Okay, so then can I conclude that we can take a little solace until such time as the supreme leader says, okay, I was wrong. We Muslims can use a nuclear weapon. The other thing is they don't need it. I mean, they've got hypersonic missiles that found their way through all kinds of these fancy air defense systems. In Israel, we don't know half of how much destruction they cause. So I guess, well, two questions. The fatwa, where does that stand now, Nima? You know about this, and Graham, you know about this better than I. Can we take any comfort or any solace in the notion that, whoops, before any real resort to fashioning a nuclear weapon as opposed to enrichment, that the fatwa would have to be announced and gone through parliament and just announced publicly? Doesn't that give us some breathing room?
Without fatwa, they cannot discuss it in the parliament. and then because the Security Council, many councils above the parliament, they would decide later on about it. But the
Okay.
fatwa should be an issued, and everybody should know about it. The public, because they want to, all the Iranian people should know about the new strategy, the new, the grand strategy of Iran. Then
Hmm.
parliament would discuss that. Before that, it is not going to happen. It's
Right.
impossible, in my opinion.
Okay. So it's a top-down sort of thing, but
Yeah,
it would
exactly.
have to be discussed. So again, gosh, seems to me that unless that happens, we can be a little bit more comfortable than most. Let me say this: that Tulsi Gabbard in March of this year not only said there is no evidence that Iran is working on a nuclear weapon, still no evidence going back to 2003, but there is no evidence that the Supreme Leader has reversed his view on the fatwa prohibiting development of nuclear weapons. Now, you could say there's been a war in between then and now, but the fatwa still stands. I don't want to beat this dead horse here, but it's a very live horse in my view. Even in this annual threat assessment, Tulsi Gabbard saw fit to indicate, look, the fatwa has not been lifted, and I kind of, trying to put myself in their skin there, and there's got to be something religious about this. Remember when they were fighting Iraq for 9 years in the 80s, Iraq was using chemical weapons that they got their precursors from us largely, okay? And did the Ayatollah authorize chemical weapons? No, he didn't.
No.
So I don't know. I'm
The
just
history of that,
meandering here.
Ray, we have the history. I really know about the total history because the commanders in those days were asking the Ayatollah to let them build, they had chemical weapons to use against Iraqis. They said, no, that's not our fight. This is not the way that we fight, and let them use that. And
Yeah.
I think the case of nuclear bomb, it can be defined in that sort of mindset. They don't see that as a game changer because they have the supersonic, hypersonic missiles.
Yeah.
Why do they need to go after nuclear bombs? And Israel is totally, and they can reach Israel, and they don't need to go in that direction.
Mhm. So my last question would be, would Netanyahu attack Iran the way he did a couple of months ago without being ironcladly sure that Trump would jump in and support him in extremis? Would he do that, or would he need prior confidence that Trump would do what he did last time? What do you think? I don't know.
Well, I mean,
Go ahead.
Ray, I don't know what those kind of guarantees would be. Trump may continue to say, as we always do, that we have Israel's back. But what does that mean in actual technical, tactical, military terms? And I'm not a military man, so I don't know what kind of, how meaningful promises are to Israel that we would be able to stop or block hypersonic missiles coming in. Maybe we'd like to, but we can't. Or maybe we can get some of them, but not all of them. I have no idea. But it seems to me a very vague concept as to how much, unless Washington, unless Trump says you're on your own, BB, and he's not going to say that. Other than that, it's very hard to interpret the meaning.
On the ground, so to speak, we have these KC-135 aircraft, a dozen of them, flying into Doha, Qatar.
Yeah.
I mean, that, my God, that worries me sick. Is that just a possible frou-frou or kind of a threat without any? I mean, these are tanker aircraft as well as other aircraft. So we've been talking theoretical here, but just over the last week, this has happened. I don't know how to read that. Do either of you?
No,
No, except they're sitting ducks, it would seem to
yeah,
me.
no.
Sitting
Yeah, and
ducks
there,
and a casus belli if they were attacked for a direct war against U.S. and Iran. But yeah, hard to guess.
yeah.
I think after all, we have to understand what is in the mind of Israel. What do they want from the attack on Iran? Because the regime change has gone. And I don't think that would be the case anymore. So the only thing that could be the case, the distraction, if they get the hostages from Hamas, and they want to go in all in to destroy everything in Gaza at the same time attacking Iran to distract us from what's going on in Gaza. That could be that's so dirty if we think
But
that way.
Nima, why do you say that you don't believe that decapitation is still on the table?
Decapitation doesn't work. Graham, who's
Yani,
gonna be the target? Let's assume Ayatollah would be the target. So who's above him? Nobody. They have 5, 10 people in the line to replace him. So who's gonna? This is a losing game. There is no win in
there
this
are
story.
people to replace him, but none of them with quite the same stature. And the psychological impact of having top leadership destroyed is very considerable. I mean, we know that Hamas and Hezbollah are capable of bringing up probably quite good commanders from the ranks up to replace the leadership. But nonetheless, it was psychologically and militarily quite damning. I I'm not sure I believe that Israel it would not attempt to wipe out large numbers of the Iranian ruling group.
You know what's going on. I don't know if you remember what has happened in the aftermath of when the supreme leader of Iran, Khomeini, the first leader of Iran, he passed away. Many people thought that's the end of revolution. That's the end, but it didn't happen.
Right.
And it just everything got. They have managed everything. They know there is a system there in Iran. The problem is that those people outside Iraq doesn't understand that within the structure of Iran, the political structure of Iran, they know how to deal with these issues. They know how to replace people. And those people, you mentioned those people who are going to replace the supreme leader, they're the same sort of mindset. I am sure, I'm 100% sure, the same sort of mindset. And they're going to pursue the same path. That's not going to change. Maybe the new leader would be more aggressive, less political, less, we don't want to talk with the West anymore. This is the
Yeah.
problem. This is the risk, in my opinion.
Yeah, Nima, I think this is one thing that persuades you that I've lost my train of thought, but the point you were making before seems to be fleshed out by what you're saying now, and I'll leave it at that because I can't recall my thought here.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd just say is that at last report, there's a very high-powered Antonov cargo plane that landed in Tehran just hours ago, Nima. Did we talk about that before?
Yeah.
So there is this Russian angle and this Chinese angle. They both have deep stakes in what happens in Iran. I don't know. I would like to think that they would have more impact on any decision, not only by Israel, but by the United States to support Israel this time around, unlike 2 months ago or whenever it was in June, I suppose, when those attacks, Israel attacked Iran and the U.S. joined the fray. So I don't know about that. What do we think about that?
I mean, Ray, you have a better feel for this than I do, but I mean, I would sense that Russia is there to prop up military support and backup, missile backup, air defense, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the possibility of a direct American uh, Russian confrontation in Iran, over Iran, about Iran is pretty unlikely. That doesn't mean it's the logistical support and air defense would be very meaningful. Maybe they would even fight against Israeli fighters. I don't know, but I would guess that an actual American Russian confrontation around Iran would be unlikely.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that.
I think Russia and China cannot afford losing Iran, because for Russia, that's the southern part of Russia would be hugely unstable. And we know the case of Georgia, we know the case of Azerbaijan and Armenia. And this the region is unstable, already unstable. That if something happens to Iran, that's the end, in my opinion. Because not the Middle East, the security of energy, the situation of energy in the Middle East is so much important for China, and the security in terms of the radicals, these Wahhabis, Salafis, these are huge. These are huge concerns on the part of Russians when it goes to the Central Asia, goes to Chechnya, Dagestan. I don't see Russia and China backing up, and on the case of Iran, they're gonna do everything possible to support Iran if something
Well,
big happens.
well, they both have treaties with
Yeah,
Iran, don't they?
yeah, they do
And
have.
I was amazed. The one between Russia and Iran took about 2.5 years to
Yeah.
negotiate. And I kept thinking, oh, probably the Russians are afraid of binding themselves to the Iranians and getting involved in a war in the Middle East, but not so. It was the other way
Right.
around. Okay,
That's right.
the
That's right.
Russians asked them, as they said, look, we can make this pretty much a mutual defense treaty like we have with North Korea. Okay, you don't want that? Well, okay, all right, you sure? So it
Yeah,
took
yeah.
that long to negotiate this. Now, I'm inclined to think, like you do, Nima, that given what's happened just this year and the stakes, and BRICS, of course, is Iran is a full member now, and there's a lot at stake. So I wouldn't rule out the fact that not only the Russian but the Chinese, who depend on oil from the Persian Gulf much more than Russians do, that they're probably telling Trump in Washington, Netanyahu won't listen. Look, you get involved with Netanyahu, and it's going to come to a no good end, as the Chinese used to say 5 decades ago. A very no good end, and that might have some impact this time. Graham, what do you think?
It's a very interesting calculus, Ray, that you raised. I'm not sure. First of all, I don't know how much frank discussion is going on between, particularly the Chinese and Washington, on these issues. The other thing, though, also, it's not an answer to your question exactly, but I think the U.S. itself now is beginning to feel increasingly caught up in a web around it, a third world web, a BRICS web, a global South web, in which it is harder and harder for the U.S. to get done what it wants to do and to make people do what it wants to do. And that worries me, that it may lead to certain elements of irrationality in striking back to prove that I'm still Tsar, as the Russian opera Boris Godunov says. I mean, that we won't give up. I don't think that Israel is going to want to give up, and especially as the pressures grow now right on Israel in the United States and elsewhere. These are getting. This is not a matter of military tactics. It's a matter of deep psychological, even existential emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that soft underbelly is really important. And you quote Boris Godunov, I could see the Russian saying, all right, Boris, got enough now, got enough. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much, Ray and Graham, for being with us today. Great pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Nima.
Enjoyed
Thank
it,
you, Graham.
Nima, with both of you. Thank you. Good discussion.
Yeah. Good.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Khuda
You too.
Hafiz.
Mhm.
Khuda Hafiz.